Hello and welcome. My name is Lauren. I live in New England with my husband and our 2 children. In this video, I'm going to share with you lots of knitting, some crochet, some sewing, and some gardening. Here, spring is just starting to arrive, and one of my favorite things to do is to go out and collect some of the forsythia. I wait until I can sort of see some of the yellow blooms just about to open, and then I cut it and bring it inside. And when you put it in the warm house, it opens it up and it brings some spring color inside just a little bit sooner than it arrives to the outside. This video is going to start with some gardening. I'm going to give you just a little bit of update about what I've been doing, getting my garden ready for the spring. Then I'm going to move into some sewing projects. And then lastly, I'm going to move over to fiber crafts. So if gardening or sewing isn't your thing, feel free to jump ahead. For me, March is the month in which I really get going on starting some seeds. I grow a pretty sizable vegetable garden, lots of different varieties, and March is the time where you really have to get all of the seeds started indoors so that they'll be ready to plant outside after the last frost date. This year, I am growing a whole assortment of tomatoes. In the past, I grew mostly Roma tomatoes, and I would use them to make large quantities of sauce for the freezer or salsa. But this year, I'm growing lots of fresh eating tomatoes, and I'm also going to grow a few varieties of peppers and some eggplants. And in addition to that, I am growing a few things for a dye garden. So I'm going to be doing some madder, which is sort of a long process, as well as some indigo. And after many weeks, I have some little seedlings. Some of them are just starting to get their first true leaves. Last year, we went to visit my in-laws. They live in England, not far from the Welsh border. And we always make a trip when we're over there visiting over to Wales for this really amazing craft store. It's called Abakhan. And while we were there this past year, I picked up these fabric pieces. And I wasn't sure what I was going to use them for, but I just loved them. I thought they would be great in some sort of home decor application. And so I finally got around to using them. I found a purpose for them. We had this little fabric bench in our foyer, and I bought it at like a TJ Maxx or Home Goods years ago, and the kids have finally fully destroyed this bench. They've like caved in the bottom part, and it's not really usable anymore. And so I went on Facebook Marketplace to look for another small bench that would fit in the space, and I found this really cute wooden bench, and I went and I picked it up a couple weekends ago and decided that these pillows, or rather these pieces of fabric would make amazing pillows for our new tiny bench. So I went to the crafting store to buy some backing fabric. Initially, I thought I would use the two pieces of fabric as one is the front and one is the back, but there was a small family decision, and everybody decided they would rather have two pillows where each one got to be on the front side of the pillow. And so what I've done is, using some fabric for the back, I cut the fabric in the pieces to try to maximize on the printed fabric that I have. And I just cut out really simple pillows and sewed around most way around, leaving an ability to turn the pillowcases right side out. And then, in order to sort of make this project as easy as possible, I opted to just sew them shut. And so hand sewing using sort of a running stitch, or I'm not sure that it actually is a running stitch, but I sewed them together, figuring that if I needed to wash the pillows, I could throw the entire pillow in the washing machine. And if I ever needed to do any sort of deep cleaning, it would be easy enough just to unpick the sewn edging and go ahead and close that up again. So I figured the least amount of work, the quickest way to get these pillows was going to work perfect for me in this situation. With the first pillow, I first started to try to close it up using some pins and just pinned it. But I found that this was a little fiddly and I was stabbing myself with pins. So I actually switched over to using these binding clips, and it worked really well. So these are clips that I had from making quilts in the past, where you would put the binding of the quilt around and use these little clips to hold it shut. So I did that, and then I bought these really overstuffed pillows, which are nice because they're really, really fluffy, but it also made the sewing them together really difficult. So I had to kind of shove the pillow down in there every so often to try and get it to stay nicely, in order for me to be able to sew just the fabric closed and not to be catching the pillowcase or the pillow in itself. And I hand sewed these using a whip stitch. And again, I chose this because I thought that if I did have to remove the pillowcase at any point, that it would be easiest to sort of see where the stitches were. What it means is that it is a little bit visible if you look close, so don't go scrutinizing too much. And the great reveal, here was the old bench and the new bench with the finished pillows on them. I absolutely love this bench. I just can't say that enough. It is so cute. I love the little detail on the back of it. It looks very similar to the Hitchcock chairs that I have in my craft room, and I just love it. A really quick little project that I got to this month was to sew some badges on my kids' Lowe's vest. We go down to the local Lowe's each month, and they have a kids craft, and it's actually really cool because it's completely free. You just sign the kids up, you go and you make a craft, and each time they complete the craft, they get to bring home their craft. And then they also get little patches to sew on their own personal Lowe's vest. And so my kids have completed their first 6 Lowe's crafts, and they got their junior builders award as a little reward for that. And now we move on to more of the knitting content of this video. This month I cast on some new socks using the yarn in front of you. It's, I believe, an 80-20 blend of wool and nylon. And I actually naturally dyed this yarn myself. I like to play around a little bit with natural dyes, both things that I grow in the garden as well as other sources. This one, I believe, was done with some black tea and some yarn that I wasn't so happy with the color of. That was a madder dyed wool that came out really pale. I cast these on using 2.25 millimeter needles, and the stitch count is, I believe, 72 stitches. I have added some accent colors to this. So the gray yarn you see is, I believe, leftover Cascade Heritage from a previous project. And then I'm gonna do the heels and toes in leftover West Yorkshire Spinners wool. I have no idea what the color of that one is. The pattern I put in here is a simple knit 2 purl 2, and you do 2 rows of knit 2 purl 2, and then you do 2 plain rows of knitting, and you repeat that. Here the cat decided she would join me and get on top of a still wet and freshly blocking hat. Isn't she so helpful? In my last video, I talked about how I'm going to be knitting a hat each month for donation. What you see in front of you is my March hat. This is a really simple 2x2 rib at the bottom, stockinette at the top. I cast on 80 stitches and used size 9 5.5 millimeter needles. Last month I also shared a sweater that I was working on for my daughter, and this is a sweater where I drew inspiration from an old Alice Starmore pattern, and I liked the look of the sweater but wanted to change some stuff, as well as the gauge of my yarn was very different from the gauge of the sweater in the pattern. So I have completed this sweater. I used a Lion brand respun yarn. My daughter has really sensitive skin, and I can't use any wool containing products for her. It just causes her a lot of discomfort and itch, and she's just not able to wear them against her skin. So I used this, the Lion brand, which is great because it's easy machine washable. And I knit this on size 7 needles, and I thought I was making this sort of extra large so it would fit her for several years to come, but as you see in the when she models it at the end, I didn't quite nail an oversized sweater, but it fits her perfectly. I used a corrugated ribbing at the cuffs and the hem, as well as the neckline. I initially thought I was going to pull back the sleeves so that the corrugated ribbing led directly into the blue, because it really bothered me on the sleeve part. However, when I finished the whole sweater, it no longer bothers me. I think it looks pretty much perfect the way that it is, and she thinks the same thing. When I first finished the sweater, I was really concerned about the neck of the sweater and how the collar was sitting. It kind of stood up. But after my daughter put it on, I really wasn't concerned anymore. It seems to sit just right on her and looks really nice. The next project that I got up to this month, I cast on and finished a hat using some yarn. Again, this was hand dyed by me. I dyed this many years ago. I'm pretty sure it's a cochineal dyed yarn, and again, it's fingering weight, and this is a I believe a 75/25, and it I bought this thinking that I would dye it up for sock yarn, but in the end I didn't enjoy the way that this yarn knit up as sock yarn. It felt a little thick and uncomfortable as a sock yarn. It just wasn't as light of a fingering weight as I prefer when knitting socks. So what I did here is I decided that I would take the yarn and hold it double to knit a hat. So I held the yarn double and used size 7 4.5 millimeter needles, and I knit this hat pattern once before. I created this probably about 5 or 6 years ago using a DK weight yarn, and I decided I wanted to try to reknit the hat and also write up the directions for it. When I do have the directions written, I'll be sure to post it. I'll post it on Ravelry. It's going to be a free pattern. It's a modified old shale stitch pattern that I've used here. It really opens up nicely when worn. So the next project I'm going to show you is a sweater that I'm working on for my husband. I'm again using an Alice Starmore pattern as a jumping off point. I got a couple of these older Alice Starmore books, and I found them so interesting and inspirational as sort of jumping off points. But again, it's really just the style that I'm using and putting it onto a different sweater design. Here I loved the open neck 3-button top, as well as the patterning on the top of it, and the plain stockinette bottom. So I've taken those elements and I'm putting it on a raglan style sweater. I'm using a Plymouth Encore yarn. I actually won this yarn ages ago at a Stitch and Pitch event. And I'm using size 8, US size 8, 5mm needles. And I have taken some of the patterns directly from the book here, and some of them I sort of improvised to match the stitch count that I had for this sweater. And what I really loved about knitting this sweater is that for all of the arms and the body, it's just miles and miles of stockinette stitch, and all the sort of work is at the top. And what that allowed me to do is to mix two of my favorite things, which are reading and knitting. I can knit while I read, as long as it's plain stockinette. Once it gets to patterning, I can't really keep track on the page as well as where I am in the pattern. And so I had a good long miles and miles of stockinette stitch here as I worked up to the yoke part. And now I've switched to having to do other things while I knit this sweater. For this sweater, I used a favorite ready-made sweater to get the sizing down. In the past, I measured his body and then added the ease that I thought he would appreciate, but I decided that with this one, I was just gonna take one of his favorite sweaters and measure that and figure out the ratios for a raglan based on the ready-made. This month I got up to a little bit of crochet. Crochet isn't something that I do a tremendous amount of, but I decided that since Easter is at the end of this month, that I would crochet some little amigurumis for my kids. The pattern that I found is available on Etsy. I tried to get it on Ravelry again to look it up, and I had a little bit of difficulty, so I'll link both the Etsy and Ravelry below if I can find it. And the little cottontail here, what I liked about this pattern is that it had accompanying patterns for some clothing, and I feel like that's just the ultimate when you can put little clothing on them as well. I went to the store and bought some safety eyes for this as the pattern recommended. And then I needed some little buttons for the overalls and outfits that these little guys have. And so my husband had an old work shirt that he had stained and no longer needed. And so I was able to repurpose some of the buttons from there and use them on the overalls for the little bunnies. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this process. It was like each day I could make a new little item for the little guys to wear, and all of them are so tiny and so cute. I just loved it. All the yarns I used were leftover yarns from other projects. I think all of them were DK weight. For the bunnies themselves, I used a 3mm hook, and for the clothes, I went up to a 3.25 to give it a little extra room. And here they are finished. Each little guy got 2 outfits, and they do a little dance at the end and show you their very adorable tails. The last little bit of these bunnies, I decided to make them personalized name badges and tags, a little homage to Paddington. I named my daughters Sweet Pea and my son's Basil. Thank you everyone for joining me. I hope that everyone has had a really nice March full of many making crafts, and I look forward to sharing with you next month all that I get up to in April.